Welcome to the FounderVideo podcast, an interview series bringing you the latest and greatest info on B2B marketing, revenue operations, and go-to-market strategy from respected experts. Here is your host, Will Martin.
All right, so we here for the 9th episode of the FounderVideo podcast. Today we have Cody Schneider as a guest. I'm pretty excited about this conversation. We're here to talk about influencer marketing, AI, the impact of AI, and more. But first off, who is Cody Schneider for everyone out there listening that might not know you? Like, what do people need to know about your past in order to understand who you are today as the founder and CEO of Swell.ai, among other projects that you've run?
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me, Will. I'm super stoked to be here. I think the high-level bullet points are there really kind of three things. So I worked started off in e-commerce, then ended up working at a B2B marketing agency. Our clients there at the agency were Fortune 500 companies that like manufactured like home goods. So imagine like doors, windows, shower bases, all this very unsexy stuff. So really like learned how to do B2B marketing well with like super like long purchasing decision time horizons, long sales cycles, et cetera. And like, how do you actually provide value in a setting like that? And then my boss there, he went to Y Combinator and, did the whole startup thing. And so from him kind of got my first, taste of, okay, there's this whole other software world, like B2B software in particular. And so from there ended up at a company called Rupa Health. I joined as like employee 6 or 7, and we ended up taking them from about a $20 million valuation to a $110 million valuation in about 6 months. My job there was to 0 and 1, like kind of the whole content, like owned media engine. My background was in early stage, really just like how do you build audiences? How do you create the top of funnel inbound, et cetera. And so one of the things I did there was like start their podcast. We ended up growing that from like 0 to 140,000 downloads a month in about 6 months. We grew an Instagram account to about 100K followers. I think they're at like 108 now. But when I was there, we took it up to like, I think 80,000 right when I left. But it did that in about 12 months, and then kind of built out all these other media components in relationship to that. So yeah, that's really the high level. I'm obsessed with early stage companies. I always joke that like my perfect, I'm really good up until they have HR. As soon as you get HR and like there's all this like red tape of like how you can and can't basically do marketing in your job. I become very ineffective and a very bad employee. So but now co-founded this company called Swell, and that's my biggest focus. So.
That's funny, man. I'm a fan of a company until they have HR. That's such a good
I'm
indicator,
valuable
actually.
to a company until that point, right? Like as soon as it gets there, I've just found that like it's right around that 50 employee mark. It really starts to change at 30, around 50. It's where it gets really different. You just have to like organizational, like structure wise, you have to. It can't be just like this kind of free for all where everybody is sharing all the information that they're getting on a daily basis. And, you're living in Slack and doing Looms, et cetera. And kind of everybody is up to speed on the information that's accessible. As soon as you start to get to scale with a certain amount of employees, you have to have more of a top-down structure. It's just the only way to kind of, in my opinion, to see it function. Like even these companies that are like, oh yeah, we have a flat structure, right? Like if you look at like Gore-Tex or any of these like ones that champion this, all of them, they naturally have leaders rise within the organization. All of those leaders get like more authority. So it's like, yeah, it's a flat structure, but the people that are like good at leading just end up leading. That's just like how they basically mimic the what we see naturally occur in nature. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of the how I see.
Yeah,
and this is a great thing for founders to remember too, right? Like when you get to that point, like you have to adjust, you have to change, and that was a challenge that we faced. Like we grew so rapidly that we were trying to catch up with the organizational structure for how big the company was and how big the company was going to be. And I remember we did projections and we're like, yo, our employee head count is going to be at like 70 in like, 120 days. And we were at like 35. And, it just, how do you plan for that and like get, people to think differently when 12 months ago it was like, okay, how do we get our first 100 customers, right? So anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a big thing. Like I think this I've you can see patterns of it, but most companies once they get big enough, they stop. Like it's almost as if they forget about what made them grow so much, and because of the complexity of human organization, basically, as you said, it's human nature to have some leading and some following. It becomes really hard to do disruptive stuff, or like just let ideas flow and do something more innovative, and like you start operating with boundaries and stuff. We'll talk about it later about like
Yeah,
how
totally.
bloated teams, the future of bloated teams, and how to be efficiency with human resources. But before let's talk about knowledge, I wanted to ask you this question because as the founder of Swell.ai and with everything that we've seen in the market happen in the past 2 years, do you think that knowledge has become commoditized at this point, or that it will be soon enough with AI, with the rise of AI? And if so, how does this affect content marketing performance?
That's a great question. I actually think the opposite. I think that good, like high, so people that are experts within their field have become more valuable than they ever were before. So when you look at these like general or, these large language models, they're trained off of the just knowledge of the internet, right? The average knowledge of the internet is pretty terrible. Like when you look at like, the bell curve of like knowledge, it's not that great. Really, there's just pockets. There's these silos of where knowledge actually exists, and it's kind of typically hard to find that. If you go to a chatbot right now and you're like, give me unique ideas about hotel marketing strategies for 2024, like it's going to give you terrible takes, right? It's just not going to be unique. It's not going to be interesting. It's not going to be novel. I think experts now are really the only way that you can identify that information. So how I'm thinking about it more and more is like this library of content that companies create and develop and store, that is going to be a differentiator for them, especially when they create this walled garden, and then all of this like content and marketing information or materials that they're making is based off of that source files that they only have access to. And to make that more tangible of an idea, more concrete, if I go and again ask AI, like write me a blog post about the 10 hotel marketing strategies, right, for 2024, it's going to be pretty terrible, like the output that I end up getting. But in contrast, if I go interview 5 of the leading hotel marketing experts in the world, and I have a 30-minute conversation with each of them, I take that transcript, I put that into a context window, and then I'm like, okay, now write me a blog post based off of the source material that I just provided. I gave these constraints to the AI. That is when like you see the magic of this knowledge, like really the content that you're producing start to happen. And I probably, like you guys see this as well with like your company and like what you're doing, like what you're taking is like these these ideas that were captured in a founder's mind or whoever your client's mind is, they are, trapped there until you can get them out in public and like show them in some form that is, that is receptive to the channel that they're trying to do marketing on. So like when you have an interview, you can, if I go to LinkedIn, like what we're seeing worked on LinkedIn right now is like a selfie of somebody and then a story about like their business. It's so stupid, but that's what's working. So then you have to build content that is going to be receptive to that platform. In contrast, if I go to like YouTube Shorts, like what we're seeing work right now is like some type of viral hook at the beginning and then an insight that immediately follows it, right? So you make them a promise and then you give them that knowledge or you give them that like value. And so the different pieces of content or different types of content that you have to create for each of those platforms is, you have to think about that within your content, like marketing engine. But I think that when we look at where good content is going to come from, nothing's changing. Like the people that have the most knowledge and the most expertise are going to have the most, insightful takes, the most insightful information. And like, how have we been writing books for the last 1,000 years? It's like, okay, we talk to everybody that we can. Like a great example is How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? Classic business book. All he did, like he didn't even write that book. Most people don't know this. Like he hired a couple journalists. They went and they interviewed like 150 of his like friends and friends of friends that were CEOs of companies. They took all those interviews. They found all the common threads between them. They then organized basically like a chapter outline. They then wrote that book, and then he came in and like added his like own sauce over the top of it to make it sound more personal and like him. And I mean, that's one of the best selling books of all time. And all we're talking about with any of this content creation thing is that exact same process. But instead of, a human going through and doing that categorization and structuring that unstructured data, now that AI is really good at taking, this massive corpus of information, finding those common threads, and then giving you that first draft so that then you can go, the how I keep talking about is like the 10% up front and the 10% on the end. That's where all of the like focus of the human should be. All of that middle section is where all these automations can be built and used. So I kind of a long-winded response, but I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I agree. I mean, I was talking more so. I mean, I think it would be interesting to define the difference between knowledge and expertise. Because for me, like, but my answer to that question at least would be that knowledge, yes, has become commoditized to the point that LLMs can, stitch together those threads and actually like connect the dots. And as you will said, right, structure the unstructured data, right? And we were seeing it already. I mean, actually, a few days ago, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Chris Walker, but he recently developed a custom LLM with all of the content from Refined Labs and all about demand generation and everything, right? So you can ask it like specific questions, such as maybe not hotel marketing, but like,
totally.
How do I structure my Google ad spend? How can I
how do I do better account-based marketing for this industry or whatever,
etc.
Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Or I have this reporting data problem. How can I fix it inside Salesforce? Whatever the fuck, right? And the point with that, I think, is, as you will say, is what's invaluable these days and what's becoming the most valuable asset, so to speak. It's not only to have that expertise that's not replicable by AI and that is depending on your unique personal experiences and kind of sauce, so to speak, right? But also how to transmit it. That's kind of, I think, one of the most important ways. And I think, what we do at FounderVideo for sure is like making that transition, making that last step of like, we know you have that kind of expertise that's irreplicable and that's worth putting out because it's not being replaced by AI. But now how can we make you put it out consistently in a way that resonates, right? And so the guided interviews format is meant to be that. But I would like to kind of like pick your brain on how do you see companies trying to implement AI or battle against AI? Because some are, might be like trying to put together a strategy that it's the opposite of what AI is trying to do with the market. But how are they doing it wrong, and why do you think is the best way to approach this big shift for B2B companies to increase efficiency, most importantly, and then we'll talk about more use cases later.
Yeah. Maybe I start with the mistake. Like the biggest mistake I'm seeing companies do is they're trying to like restructure or like redo their entire marketing workflows, like with these AI tools, like from the beginning. And like, I think that's a bad way to do this, just based off of what we've seen from our like users. Like when you come in and you try to like, reinvent your entire system, it normally breaks. So what's a way better way to accomplish like this transition is just like, look for the parts that are like, honestly, what we ask anymore is like, what do you hate doing most, right? And they're like, cool, I hate doing this. And I'm like, sweet, we can automate that away entirely. Do you want to pay for that? And like 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes, right? Especially if it costs them less. So like a great example of this, my friend, he does all he does is just consulting on this. It's like automation consulting using AI. So he connects like Airtable and Zapier and like ChatGPT, like the OpenAI API, connects those all together. And he'll go in and he'll look at business processes and he'll be like, okay, cool. Here's all this paperwork that you're doing manually currently. I'm going to just automate away all of this paperwork. And now your team can focus on, the very human parts of the business. So a lot of the work that he's doing right now, from my understanding, is in the real estate space. So for him, he's like, majority of what they were spending their day to day on was basically like doing paperwork in relationship to these deals that they were working. And, imagine a team of 20 people all working on these deals. And he comes in, he automates away that paperwork piece. Now they can do like, more FaceTime with clients. They can move deals along faster. The velocity starts to suddenly increase. And that immediately makes, impact the bottom line in 2 ways. One, they just automated away a deleterious task. So they're no longer having to pay a human to do that thing, which is a cost saving, function. And then the other side of it is because they now freed up time of their staff that's like, high value. And that's really has deep knowledge on, okay, selling, right? And being, doing that hard human thing. They now can focus on this higher revenue generating activity, which just creates greater impact across the entire work. So I think that, my suggestion, and for especially like large companies that are like, okay, how do we transition to this? We see it on the horizon, and especially the ones that are fighting it. Like if you're fighting this is an inevitability. We're going to end up here. 1,000% we're going there. This is like fighting Excel. Like that's the idea that you're basically fighting here. It's going to be ubiquitous and it's synonymous with all business functions. So if that's the case, and that's my thesis, if that's the case, then you have to implement this, taking these baby steps where it's like, cool, like if I can automate away 5% of this, activity, 10%, 20%, 50%, 80%, the amount of impact that I can make to my company just off of those small changes is going to be, you're going to have a ripple effect through the entire organization. So, and also what you find is that when you do these small things first, it like gets you more acquainted with it. And then you start to understand like, okay, cool. Like, this is how it kind of thinks, right? Because like what we found, and I think for a lot of people, like a year ago, everybody was like, how do we do good prompt engineering? Like, how do you get it to like create the outputs that you're looking for? And like through interacting with it, the more you start to realize like, oh, like I personally think this language means this, but it thinks this language means, Y, which is entirely different than what I thought. So for example, like if I say like find viral hooks, in a transcript, it's going to pull out stuff that's like super uninteresting, like doesn't have any value. But if I say, hey, list the 5, list 10 insights from this episode, and it lists those out. And then I'm like, okay, now find me direct quotes that support these insights. And then it goes and it finds direct quotes from the transcript that supports the insight, the output that you're going to get from that. And then you go and you make a clip from that, you have it report back the timestamps, et cetera. The output that you're going to get from that is going to be like at a quality level that's way higher. But again, you just don't discover these things unless you're interacting with it. So it's kind of like, this muscle that you're working out, that you're starting to flex. And again, like, do you want 2 years from now, do you want to start lifting weights, or do you want to start, lifting weights today and 2 years from now be shredded, right? Like that's kind of the mindset. And it's that, age old saying of like, the best garden was planted yesterday, right? And it's the same idea. We're just trying to like take these baby steps because we know it's this base technology change.
Love it. Yeah, one of those changes, I think, and that this is one of the most like biggest concerns when working with founders and companies for content is the workflows behind it, right? Like, especially you were mentioning, right? Finding a hook for a podcast, deciding on a title, deciding on the copy that you're going to use to post a video on LinkedIn, deciding like scheduling all of the posts on time, make sure that nothing's falling through the cracks, right? Make sure you mark them inside, in our case, Airtable, so that you can keep track of what's posted, what's scheduled, what's not used, et cetera, and work with ideally a 1-2 week in advance cadence, right?
This podcast is brought to you by FounderVideo. We'll cut your LinkedIn ads costs by at least 50% with natural-looking creatives that prospects actually want to consume. Just have an expert in your C-suite show up to a 90-minute interview once a month and let us take care of the rest. Turn LinkedIn ads from an accepted line item expense into a scalable revenue channel that fits into your go-to-market strategy. Book a free consultation at FounderVideo.io.
How can Swell.ai help not only companies, but also solopreneurs or any other buyer persona for that matter, leverage the tool to improve efficiency on these workflows and make content, most importantly, like reduce, so to speak, content to the activity of being themselves, so to speak, or like actually putting out their insights, recording, right? Like, which is what everyone wants to do. Okay, if content is only recording, then awesome, right? I'm gonna put out content every day. But the problem is that it's not only about recording; it's about how you package it. It's about how you post it, where you post it, when do you post it, how often, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all of these little points of intensity that keep a lot of people from doing content. Most importantly, doing it on an ongoing basis, right? So how is Swell.ai helping on that end?
Yeah, I mean, so probably the best way to answer this is like start where this all came from, right? So when we were at Rupa, we're like, we need to build a media arm because we feel that this like is going to be the only way for us to build like trust and credibility with our audience that is normally like very desired and marketed to. So like we were selling to practitioners, right? Like doctors and, nurse practitioners and like medical professionals. Traditionally, they make a lot of money and if you make more money, you get marketed to more often because you have more buying power. So your attention is more valuable, right? So what we found is that like the CPCs we were paying, like everything just across the board was like so high. It was huge. So, you're a funded company, but you're trying to think sustainably long term. So of course we're spending that money initially. But what we wanted to do from the beginning was like, okay, we need to build these digital assets that will create more mass for us on the internet so that we have like more digital gravity around the brand. So we get more like organic inbound over time. And we're going to invest in this up front, but then it'll amortize over the lifetime of the company, right? So again, that's why we built like this podcast, why we built these social accounts, why we created clips, why we repurposed this into, all these different forms. So by the end of it, we had a team of like, 15 to 20 people, depending on how you wanted to count, like with all of the like contractors and, people that were like writing for us that were basically like we were a part of this content engine. And so when I left Rupa, I did consulting for a bit and basically used that same strategy, but for an even earlier stage company, and it worked. And I was like, there's got to be a way to make this so that like any company could do the same, tactic, like turn themselves into a media company. And like you could be a solo, a team of less than 10 people and this be accessible to you. And so that's really the kind of the origin of Swell. In the beginning, the tool was honestly just terrible. Like it was a Google Drive folder. Our friends uploaded MP3s to. We would like download the files, like run our transcription software that we created, like to like, basically create the transcript. And then we'd have AI like write podcast show notes and a blog post like for them. And then we'd email them. Like I would manually email them back the content. Right. And that was the origin. We got our first customers that way, and fast forward, and now it's like a year later, or I guess a year and a half now. And like now you upload an MP4 and you have a template that's built, and that template has your brand voice, your persona. It's a complex like prompt chain. I'll explain what that is in a second. But the outputs that you end up getting from this is like from that single MP4 file, I get clips, I get blog posts, I get newsletters, I get LinkedIn posts based off of insights, I get Twitter threads based off of insights, I get white papers, I get whatever you could imagine prompting, like you could create that. And so how I'm seeing companies use this and how I'm, we're advising companies to use this is like, hey, define all of the content. Like first off, find where your target customer is. Okay, they're in all of these places, right? Cool. Now let's go make some type of source media. So a lot of the times a podcast is a really easy way to do this. It's also an excuse to do sales, right? Like I can reach out to basically anybody I want to talk to. And I'm like, hey, I have an email list with 15,000 people on it. We get X amount of downloads per month. And do you want to come on the show? Like we'll make all these social clips for you and share them with you as well. 9 times out of 10, they're like, hell yeah, this is free PR for me. Of course I'm going to do this. Especially, if it's different if they're like a huge person, like a Tim Ferriss or whatever. Like they're only going to go on these larger shows. But for the average, ICP that you're going after, if you tell them you're going to do free marketing for them, they're going to come on your show, right? So first off, you get that effect. So you get like an excuse to meet the people that you're trying to. The other, you then get that source media. So again, that MP4 and upload it into Swell. All of these pre-made content outputs are there for you. So again, like say I'm writing this blog post. What we found is that to like write an effective blog post that sounds like it's on brand, you define the brand, tone, style, and voice. So like, hey, this is like your persona. This is how we write. This is the goal. This is the company that you're writing about. Here's even your name, like right from the perspective of Cody Schneider, the co-founder of Swell.ai, right? I then put that into the context window. The second prompt within that prompt chain, and like this is how the tool is basically built, so that the chat that you would have with ChatGPT, where it's like this back and forth dialogue to get the output that you're looking for, we save that as a chain of events that are happening. So it's almost imagine it as like this like workflow that's occurring. So it's like, cool, I have this brand voice defined. And then I'm like, okay, now create a detailed blog post outline based off of the transcript that I just provided you. Creates that outline. And then I say, okay, now write me an extremely detailed blog post based off of the outline that you just created and write it in the tone, style, and voice that was defined above in that, context, right? So when we, just to break that down, what's in the context window is you have that transcript, and then you have the brand tone, like the brand voice defined. And then you have a blog post outline. And then you have the final blog post, right? This is a 1,200 word blog post that is written in your tone, style, and voice that is talking about the episode that you just recorded. And I can do that for any content output that I'm looking for. So newsletters, clips, whatever that ends up being. And so anytime that I provide that raw material, that MP4, it's just going to automatically create those content outputs for me. And so from a founder's perspective, I sit down for 1 hour a week and I have a conversation with the target customer, and then that turns into all the content I need for a week. Like, it's a no-brainer, right? So again, we started out like just working with MP3s. We just moved into like video content like in the last like 3 months-ish. And we're just starting to add source text files to some beta users, so where they can basically provide like, hey, here's just raw text, like 5 articles that we want to use as source material. Now write me an article, targeting this keyword based off of the content that I just provided you. And also like have it be in that tone, style, and voice. And that whole thing is saved as a template, right? So again, I can hypothetically like I can write 10 blog posts that are on brand voice about target keywords from an SEO perspective in like 5 minutes. Like I've done this personally, like with the thing that we've built. And I mean, when you think about the scale of what that means for like, if you're a good growth marketer, or even just a good, like, a founder that has like some type of marketing expertise, like the ability you now have, like it takes a 10x marketer and it turns them into a 100x marketer when you have these tools behind you. Same thing with engineers. Like if you're a 10x software engineer and you give them AI and they start actually like implementing it in their like programming workflows, they become a 100x engineer, right? Like why are we seeing these companies with like less than 10 people like get $100 million valuations, right? It's because that's what's happening on the back end, is you're seeing these people that are already the top performers. And when you give them these tools, it makes them, it's God mode. They turn into superhuman, right? And so anyway, yeah, that's how we're seeing people use this and start, like, we're just starting to work. Like we initially, again, started with podcasts. Podcasts are just a subset of marketing. Like when you're a marketing team, that's just like one of the activities you do. And so we're slowly just starting to climb that ladder up into, okay, now your entire marketing team sits on top of us. And it's like daily they log into this thing and you're trying to make content or do some, some type of marketing activity. You can basically go into this tool, and that's where you start, this whole journey of content creation. And we see there's this play for that. So we're just about to launch social scheduling into it as well. So you'll be able to actually like schedule the clips out to the channels that you're trying to do distribution through. And then the other things people have asked for is basically the ability to like then manage their newsletter or manage their SMS newsletter. Again, that's more on the podcasting side, where it's like, hey, I drop an episode on Monday. I want my newsletter to go out Tuesday. I'm using like 5 different tools in that process right now. You're writing my newsletter copy. Can you just like make it so I can just send the newsletter from in there? So anyways, some of the things that we're seeing and how we're seeing people use. And again, this is just like an example with us, but that exact same thing that I just talked about of like, what's the thing, like what's the output you're trying to do? Like what's an activity that you can do just, regularly on a weekly or monthly basis or whatever that ends up being. And then how do I just like layer together these workflow tools to create those outputs so that it's a repeatable process? And I see a lot of marketers, like especially junior marketers, they're like, okay, we do a campaign and then it like stops, right? There's like an end to it. And that's not how you like actually grow companies, in my opinion. Like how you actually grow companies is like you do an activity and you figure out the puzzle. And then once you figure that out, you try to automate as much of it as way as possible. So say it's like you figure out Google ads, cool. And then we layer on Facebook ads, cool. And then we layer on email marketing, cool. And then we layer on like influencer outreach and sponsored content, cool. And then so that you layer all of these growth activities together, and that's actually how you make a company like have hockey stick growth. If you want linear, you just do one of those things. But the only way I've seen fast companies grow exponentially is that there's some component of that of where they're not stopping any of the things that they're started. They're just doing them indefinitely. So again, monologuing. So cut me off at any point, Will. I'm sorry if I go off on this stuff. So
No, my pleasure to let you go off. It's interesting because I wanted to touch this topic too, like valuations with small teams. And there's a really great example of this, I think, Adam Robinson with retention.com taking it to 13 million ARR with a team of, I think it was 6 people. I have it. Yeah, 6 people. completely unheard of. And I mean, he spoke on it on the Top Line podcast with some Jacobs and others, and he was saying that was all about to break. Everyone was overloaded and whatever. But damn, even then, like 13 million ARR with 6 people, it's just
Crazy.
yeah.
It's crazy. It's like the old days. So Adobe revenue per headcount when they were like first starting out, like it was like around about $1 million. Before 2021, revenue per employee was right around like if you were a good company, you were around 300 to 400,000. Then we went into that bubble, right? Like the VC bubble of 2021, 22. They were seeing companies with like revenue headcounts around 100,000, which just that doesn't make sense. But now we're seeing this violent swing back, right? Like this correction happen where you're going to see these companies again where they're doing exactly like the example you gave, where 13 million ARR with 6 people, that's like 2 million a piece. That's the new standard that's going to happen. I think it gets more complicated, especially when you're building sales teams out. That's the one thing that I'll say. If you're a very heavily sales-driven organization, I have not seen, like maybe you can handle prospecting in a different way, but like you're still going to need humans like talking on the phone and, creating that connection, especially if you're doing like $1 million plus deals, right? So, but anyway.
There are indeed companies already trying to let you still be sales-led growth and have a team, but leverage AI to make that team more efficient, right? There's one backed by YC actually. It's called Artifact.io, I think it is, and it's
Cool.
basically this like automated SDR and AE all in one, right? It prospects and it follows up based on signals that they get from like different data providers and stuff. And it's interesting because there's been a lot of talk around, you mentioned the VC money bubble, and now that we're entering the kind of like sustainable growth, efficient, profitable growth, whatever era. And with AI too, it's like all so timely, right? It's all getting together, and there's different motions or strategies and ways of thinking about marketing in B2B and sales in B2B that I think are super interesting. One of them is signal-based selling, right? Knowing that in a lot of cases, your sales team is not as efficient because most of the data that gets tracked, even if it gets tracked, because sometimes it doesn't even get tracked inside of Salesforce, it's not architected in the right way, right? Meaning a lot of the reasons as to why you're outreaching to X account or whatever, the times you're failing to outreach to those accounts, you're not like you're tracking it, but then you're overriding that data with new signals that came in your way, because the way Salesforce is structured itself, it's not for you to track in the way that B2B buyers buy today, right? Totally. Of course, because it's so unlinear.
New world.
Yeah. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, because one of the topics that we had prepared was influencer marketing in B2B. Why is it so big? How can companies start to leverage? What are the most common mistakes and whatnot? But I don't think we need to talk only about influencer marketing. I think influencer marketing is one of the on the rise strategies that are being more and more popular because of the need for efficient and sustainable growth, and because of the need for network effect, for more leverage, for less team, for more leveraging more the power of content, and most importantly aligning with how B2B buyers are buying these days. So there's a bunch of reasons there, and I think it's the same way we see influencer marketing pop up or like be a little bit more popular, we also see something like demand generation. We also see video content being really, really big, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to, what do you think B2B is shifting towards? And what do we need to see? What do we need to see more of and less of, in your view?
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, you talked about Chris Walker. I've been following him for it feels almost like a decade now, which is crazy that he's been doing it as long as he has and just grinding on it. But I think the biggest reason this trend is occurring is like people were just tired of the traditional sales. So when I was working at that agency, like the B2B marketing agency, the feedback that we got most often was that the person knew more than the salesperson about the product. Like, just think about that for a second and let that sit in. That is insane. That is crazy that the user is showing up and they know more about this random product because they can research it more deeply on like online or whatever through all these other vehicles than the salesperson could, or just has the general knowledge about, right? And so I think there was a dissatisfaction with that, number one. I think number two, traditionally people would just go and they'd like Google something, like go and Google something now and like find any content that's actually valuable. Like, I'll wait. You won't. Like the results have just become less. They're just it's not providing the same value or insight that it was previously. And typically, you see this whenever it turns into a red ocean, right? So, like in the beginning, when you're like, for every network, there's like a happy place, like in the middle of the network's lifespan, where like it's the best version of itself. Like now, when we look at search, it's in that final like decaying age, because people have like realized like, oh, here this is this valuable business tool for me to use, right? But so I think that those things were happening simultaneously in people's personal lives. They were starting to consume and get educational content on social media, right? Like if you go back 10 years and you look at like Instagram and its, adolescent stage of life, it wasn't like, you wouldn't find like, okay, here's how to start a business online. I'm going to show you how to drop, whatever. Like that, it wasn't really being used for that in its beginning phases, maybe in some small subsets, but in its like earliest iteration of itself, like it was just content that was like more social. Like here's photos of me at a party or whatever, right? But then over time, people started to like have desire for knowledge from those platforms. Same things happen to YouTube. Like where do you go to learn anything anymore? Like that's like digital. Like you start on social and YouTube, right? Like that's the origin of your search. So I think that was happening. So if we look at those two things, right? Say people feeling they know more than the salesperson, and them finding informational content in social, and them trusting that informational content more than a Google search because there's a human that's behind that informational content. Like Chuck is telling me about Windows, and Chuck, all he does is he just learns about Windows and talks about it on the internet, right? So like if Chuck lies to me, I have a face to point at being like, you're a liar. Like there's a social repercussion if the content quality is bad. In contrast, like if you go to like a blog, it's almost nameless and faceless, right? Like there's no person that you can point at for your dissatisfaction. So when you look at those two things together, though, I know more than the salesperson, and here's this thing that I'm doing in my personal life. Of course, that's going to flow over in the B2B world, right? Anything that happens in econ, like it always starts out in like direct to consumer and like, like apps that are like personal finance apps or whatever. Like you see trends start there, and then it gets kind of adopted in B2B software, and then it kind of gets adopted to the general B2B. Like it's a slow progression, and people think it happens way quicker than it does. It's, they're like, oh, it's going to change in the next 18 months. It's like, no, it's not. It's going to change over like a 10-year period, because that's the pace that these companies are moving at, right? But I think all of those things together created this moment in time where there was this like gap, there almost a vacuum for this desire to have like educational content in public, like in this B2B form. And that's why you're seeing it. So I think that happened. The other thing I want to tack onto this is what is going on with like GDPR, and basically just like your ability to track your digital advertising from that pipeline, right? I mean, I remember in the early days of Facebook ads, like you could just run like real estate ads without any like it was basically like you're doing illegal ads, right? Like is what I'm trying to say. And like you could like target people by income and like, are they looking to move, right? You could basically be like, yo, I want top 1% of incomes within these specific zip codes. And then I want them to have an interest in this vacation, like rental area. And you used to be able to just like run ads to those people. I mean, it's crazy. It was the Wild West, right? And like also get 10-cent clicks on that. Like now that's like, you want to run a real estate related ad, it's like $2 minute, and it's probably not that much. It's probably around like you get around like 120. But anyway, so I think that, all of those things together is what really just drove, like people are looking for experts and the information that experts have, not regurgitate. They want to go to the source rather than like hearing, a secondary or a tertiary source talk about that thing. Like why? And especially now it's like you have these people that, I mean, think about how many physicians are starting like podcasts. Like I used to have to go pay that, that dude, like whatever, $350 for an hour of his time. And now he's talking about this expertise that he has in public. like say he's doing some regenerative medicine like thing with if you, so I think that like the conversations that used to be that used to happen behind closed doors, they're now happening in public, and people want that type of content more and more because they're just so dissatisfied with like all of this curated stuff that has existed previously. So I don't know if that answers the question, but like those are the three things that I'm seeing that like affected this. So
yeah, no, totally agree. I think it's funny you mentioned, because so there's a bunch of physicians now starting a podcast in the same way that there's a bunch of other people starting a podcast. There's a bunch of other people creating content because everyone wants to be that expert that people come to for information so that they can sell something, right?
And just to interject, like you have to do this. Like where is Gen Z starting their searches? Right? Like if you look at the search, like where Gen Z goes to like begin their discovery phase of like identifying a product or a place to go, they start on TikTok and Instagram Reels. Then maybe they go to Google and be like, okay, cool. Like how far is it from me? But what they're doing, so like if you're a small business or like any type of company that's selling a product, like you have to think about this as being a part of your strategy now, because nobody is like the next generation they're not even starting in the traditional form. Like they're not going to like Google and doing that search. They're like, yo, I want to hear Sarah, who lives in my neighborhood, talk to me about her favorite restaurants that are in this general vicinity. Right. And that's who they're going to trust. That's where they're going to start. And that is going to flow over into B2B, where it's like, yo, I'm going to go and I'm going to find Charlie who specializes in supply chain management, and I need software for, shipping. And he's going to probably have some insight that's way more valuable than like some random listicle that I found on BuzzFeed. Right. So anyway.
Yeah. And the barriers, I have a lot to unpack here, but so it would be interesting to talk about how the maturity of companies is related to how much do you need to create demand versus how long can you stay in the market just through capturing demand. So that is another conversation, because I think it's really tied into how close do you need to feel to your buyer and how much of an effort do you need to do with your content marketing and in what channels. But that, I think it's worth an entire podcast, so we don't get into that. But I think like tying it to what you said right there, which is, these days Google search has lost a lot of authority because it's not what it used to be anymore. And I think we're seeing, because of the like overflow of information and this big red ocean that we're in now, right? We're trying to find the people that we can hold on to and actually trust and listen on an ongoing basis. And we want to have this curated list of creators and just stay with that. And if anything, I'll find like if I follow a new podcast, it's because it's going to be recommended by this and this, or it's because, I'm going through the network, basically. It's not that I'm finding it randomly, right? So it's all getting more, we're trying to connect the dots.
Right?
Exactly.
Like they're seeing the signals of the things that are keeping me most on like the longest time on platform. Like, and this is just like, again, just expand on that real quickly. Like, what is the business model of social media companies? Like, it is monetizing your attention. Okay. So if that is the factor, like they're going to do whatever it takes to get you to be on platform for as long as possible. What they're finding is that For You page content, so content that just like randomly shows to you based off of what you've watched previously, is how they keep people to stay on platform longest. So if that's the case, right, like what happens is people will get into these like content, like, gravities. Well, I don't know what else to call them, or content wells, or whatever we want to say.
Loops.
Yeah. Loops. Right. And so for you as a brand, it's like, okay, cool. Like, how do I make content that's in this loop for these people that get in that loop? Because that's my target customer. And so I'm just trying to make things that will show up in that. And that's how this discovery is naturally starting to happen. That's how brands can capitalize on it too. Right. And like, again, you see this in e-commerce, you see this in direct to consumer, you see this in like apps that are like, these not like business to business apps. Like, what are they doing? They're hiring influencers. Those influencers, they go and make content related to topics that are in that kind of sphere of that's their buyer persona would exist in. And then they're just trying to saturate that sphere as much as possible so that you just start to like, it just creates inbound, right? Like, again, like, for just to make this tangible on a marketing strategy side, like we're looking at all the keywords related to podcasting that's like AI related as well. So like podcast show notes and podcast intro maker and like anything like that, right? And then we go and we make all this content for all of these different channels, and you just post it on a regular basis, and it starts to get like basically consumed by that audience. And then you take that same strategy and you go and you work with these influencers to do campaigns with them based off of the things that you're seeing work internally. You're just doubling down on those externally. And like that same process, like that, any B2B company can go and do that, in my opinion. It's going to be harder in different areas, like especially like finance, et cetera. But in reality, like that is the future. This is where this is going. And it's almost like PR in this way, which is super weird. Like it's like this, like it's kind of marketing. It's kind of PR. I was listening to my friends, I was to talk to my friends about this. Like they work in the app, like the mobile app space. He was the head of growth at like Depop and Deliveroo. And they had a guest on their show. And basically what she was talking about was like how they will start trends on like TikTok, like they'll like cloud seed them basically. And then what that does is that creates like demand generation for this like new thing, right? So like, for example, they were selling like some type of like sweatpants that were like cashmere or something. So then people would go and they would like search like cashmere sweatpants, and then they would want to show up for those results. So it was like they had discovery that was happening on this, and then they have like exact match like content that was on the platform, and that was what was bringing people down the funnel. And I think we're just starting to see that in consumer, and that naturally it always starts in consumer, and then it like flows over into B2B. So
yeah, social is the new engine. That's for sure.
100%.
Like, that's why the search feature from TikTok, it's been blowing. Like it's
100%.
It's the most used thing these days. Okay, so why, like with everything that we just said right now, like talking about the red ocean, talking about video, talking about influencers, talking about all of the sophistication of the market that's going on because of the, I mean, you could call it decentralization and need for centralization, because people need a structure to retain stuff, right? Otherwise, they forget everything. So why do B2B SaaS founders, especially, and I'm talking about B2B SaaS because it's, the industry that most of my audience is in, and because I think it's where, a lot of things have gotten maybe one could argue too sophisticated, and it's the the industry that has suffered from the VC money bubble the most, right? So why do founders in B2B SaaS need to get on video to even have a chance at finding first product market fit, and most importantly go to market fit?
Yeah. I mean, I think the easiest answer is like, that's how your customer wants to be talked to. And when you just like disguise it as informational content, like it's not even sales at that point, right? Like, again, so I do a little bit of consulting on the side still, about to help my friend like basically grow his company. And so like for them, like their target customer is interior designers. So we're going to go and scrape every interior designer's email in the United States. And then we're going to spin up a podcast that's related to his product. And then he's going to just interview the customers of his company and ask them about their business and how it's running, et cetera. And we're going to email that We're going to grow, take that email list. We'll do cold email to it. We'll also do customer match audiences across all social, like Instagram, or Facebook ads, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, et cetera. Do customer match lists with that. We'll run ads to those people as well. So again, thinking about all these layers. That same email list, we'll do cold email to. That same email list, we'll do cold LinkedIn DMs to. That same email list will then sequence them, like basically grow an email newsletter for their podcast, right? So then on a weekly basis, those people by the end of the year, every week, they're going to get a podcast from this company that's about their industry, talking to somebody that's in their industry that has knowledge about XYZ topic or thing. And that video content that they produce, that gets turned into clips that goes across all social channels. And then you can do some like optimizations, like, growing the Instagram account, growing the, the LinkedIn accounts, growing the, wherever else you're trying to be. And with that, like they'll get to $1 million ARR doing that whole process. Right. When we think about like the time that's necessary for the founder to think about this, like that's an hour a week of time for him to sit down, have a 30-minute conversation, and then like get all this content produced basically and schedule it out. Like you can do this in 2 hours, right? Or you just hire a VA and be like, here's my process, like go schedule content out. Like you create that source file. But all the ads piece, like that goes on autopilot. And like, this is the way that people are like, and this is how you 0 to 1 a brand, right? Like, so I did this for another company. They were in they're like an insurance CRM for like insurance agents. They now don't exist. The unit economics of it didn't work, which sucks. They were growing so fast. I was pissed. But basically, like, they were venture funded, and they couldn't get to a billy. Like, there was like not a clear path on like how the company's economics would function. So they like shut it down. Basically, the two founders did. They're like, oh, this can be like a 10 million ARR company, but it can't be 100 million, right? So it's like they basically stopped it. But for them, what we did is like that exact process. So we scraped like all of the insurance agents in the US, and we got them into an email list. And like, we're talking from like non-existent, they have like 5 customers, to like by the end of the year, they go to a conference and they have people like coming up to the founder, her name was Sarah. And they're like, hey, like, I listen to your show every week. Like, I love what you're doing. Like, it's amazing what, I mean, think about that change from like, you don't exist in a especially in these industries that are like more traditional. Like, for example, like if you try to like the music industry or entertainment industry, hardest place ever to sell things, right? If you just made a podcast that was like you talking to like industry experts about the industry, and then emailed that to like everybody in the industry, in 6 months, you would be like one of the top, like everybody would know that you exist as a company. Like that's the leverage that exists here, right? And then the byproduct of that is then, again, all of this content for all these social channels that you have to be on if you want people to have natural discovery of you. So it's like layering all of this together. Like, that is where I see kind of the impact, and like why founders they have to think about. Like, also, there's this weird, like, I don't know why it's happening, but like, I imagine this is something you're seeing too. Like the personal brand of founders is becoming more and more valuable than it ever was before. Like, that is a leverage point. And like, the biggest thing is like, if I have a bigger follower count on my LinkedIn and I cold DM somebody, I have a higher likelihood of getting a response if I have 50,000 followers on LinkedIn. I have a higher likelihood of getting a response if I have 50,000 followers on Twitter, like from that DM, right? And so it creates leverage to do PR. So I work with I have a company that basically just places me on podcasts, right? Like, that's why I'm here today talking to you. Like, this is what they do. They just like, they get me on shows, right? And so part of the point of like the leverage point for like me to get on these, and I'm talking on these shows that like I have no business being on, like one was like the recent one was just like on IBM, right? It's like an IBM podcast, like that's sponsored by, like it is it is on IBM's website. And the thing that's crazy, what the social piece has done is it's allowed me to have negotiation leverage to go on these shows where I'm like, hey, I have an email list of XYZ size. My Twitter following's this, my LinkedIn's following's this, and like, we'll do cross promotion of the show. And that's all they're trying to do. Their metric of success is, do I get more downloads? So if you have an audience, you can go on and like basically get onto these places that you have no, again, we're a 1.5 year old company. Like, I have no business talking to all of these people, right? So that's a component of it. But how do you actually grow these accounts? Like, it's just consistent posting. How do you make consistent content? An hour of video chopped up is the easiest way I've seen to make weekly consistent content. And again, like, that's an hour of your time. Like, you can schedule in an hour of your time out of a 60-hour week that you're working to get that out the door. That's totally doable. So.
Yeah, and doing the work too. Like, I think a lot of people are so obsessed with content that they forget to do the fundamentals, and therefore they like don't have content ideas, because all they are is in this bubble of content, and when content should be what you're describing right there, which is a semi-automated process, very efficient, repeatable, scalable, that doesn't take much of your time, and that lets you be on the spotlight. Unfortunately, though, of course, like, well, unfortunately, depending on how you see it, but most people are not there yet. Most people are not there yet, because there's a bunch of
about putting stuff out there in public. Like, I mean, most founders I talk to, they're like, oh, I'm so worried. Like, what if I, and half of this is just like, it's the same thing. It's just like working out a muscle group. Like, you just get in the gym and you get like better and better. Also, like, the biggest thing is like, I've done, I don't know, probably 35 of these shows at this point. like you get so much better at talking about your product, and like it's just at bats for you to describe it. Like, of course, as a founder, like that's one of the hardest things is like to get somebody that listens. And here's this whole other, like, I can sit here and basically like try these different ways of explaining these ideas and these topics and what my product does and where does it fit in and how do I find that mental real estate that I can plant a flag in so that I can attach it to something that already exists in your mind, right? Like all of those, it just gives you those at bats. Oh, and the byproduct is, you're in front of their entire audience. You get all of this like clip content that you can make out of it. So there's just all of these compounding things that are occurring.
And it also forces you to get better at your messaging. Like I found myself and founders that we work with too, like it is an exercise when we're about to record the first interview, right? Like the question pops and it's like, okay, so what should we be talking about, right? I need to prepare the question. So let me tell me more about your company. Who's your buyer persona? Who's your ideal customer, right? Like what do people tell you in sales calls that it's making them buy, right? And more often than not, we need to talk to sales to get some insights. But in a lot of cases, it's thought provoking because they realize, oh well, maybe I'm not that sure about this and that. Like maybe let me get back to you on that and let us do the exercise of thinking about how can we resonate with your, because I don't really know if we should be talking about this or not, right? So totally. I think creating content, it's also about that too. It's like getting direct market feedback from the people you're talking to, and at the same time you get to self-analyze if the topics that you're covering are actually at the core of what you're building, right?
And the data shows you that, especially when you make For You page content, right? Okay, cool. We go and chop this up into 20 clips and I post all of those clips over the next month. And what you're going to see is like 10% of those clips are going to produce like 80%, or 20% of those clips produce 80% of like all the views. Okay, what do those clips have in common that are the best, like the highest performers? Cool. It's these two topics. Let's talk more about those two topics. Next call you create this growth, it's just like you're just making growth flywheels. It's the same strategy, just applied in all these different places. So, and
just like Chris Walker's, I mean, you mentioned that you've been following for him for a decade and whatnot. Big fan as well myself, and hopefully we bring him on to the podcast to talk more about what he's doing at Paceto lately. But one of the things he said once, it's that with content you're testing the form, not the content itself, right? The content itself, you should be validating rapidly what ideas are actually working. What is the way you package it, because you can only have so many ideas, right? 100%. And you can the ideas of course branch out, but yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And the idea, like I think the thing I see people mess up on most often is the idea has to be packaged in a way that audience on that platform is used to interacting with and consuming, right? So like LinkedIn, right now to use this example, like a written story with a selfie will get more reach than that same idea in a clip format, and just on what we're seeing, right? Like that, if I did you can't even do text in YouTube Shorts, right? But like hypothetically, if you could, like it wouldn't go as viral as the clip. And so you have to think about those two things, like the idea, and then you're basically taking that same idea and you're just making content formats for all the places that your target customer is online. And like a question I get asked all the time is like, where should we market? What should we be focusing on? And like the answer is the same. Like it's like, where's your target customer? And like not half the time they don't even know. They're like, we don't know. We don't know where they spend time online. Or I'm like, okay, cool. So first, let's figure that out. Like, where are they? Where are they active? Once we figure that out, then we go to that place. We meet them where they are, and we make content for. Like again, this interior design group probably going to be on Pinterest, right? So we're going to figure out a strategy to do Pinterest content. I don't know what that is yet, but that's like a part of the puzzle. That's a part of the process. And so it's like starting from like, where are they? Like, what am I trying to sell them? And then bridging that gap together. Like that's actually how you do good marketing. And content is this incredible vehicle for it. And like we talk about content like it's this new fucking thing. Like it's not new. like this is what we've been doing for forever. Like you look at like Ogilvy, like and all of this stuff, like any ads from even like the late 1800s, like it's the same strategy. It's storytelling, it's identifying problems, it's solving problems, it's having call to actions to like solve your problem with this thing. It's the same. Like the only things that's changed is the medium. And so you're just adjusting the same ideas to this different medium. So
I wanted to ask about mindset, but now that I think about it, like mindset shift to, go from bloated to lean teams in B2B organizations, especially not at early stage, right? Not saying grown up, but, a company that's surpassing the 100, 200, 300 mark of headcount. They're probably already like deep in the weeds. And I've seen companies that have become way more lean in the past year and a half. Companies going from 120 employees to 37. You know, how do you go through that process without? Well, I mean, of course, it's hard because you need to fire a lot of people, and that's always not yeah, good. But my point is like, how do you make that transition, and what are you mentioned before that the best way to approach it is like think of the problems that you hate the most and then start by that. But when we talk on an organizational level, you cannot go asking like the whole company, okay, what are the things that you hate the most, and then start automating that and that and that and that, right? You
Why
need to
not
think
though?
it more. I
Like
mean,
I used
because
to
it
ask
would
my employees this. Like I would go and I'd be like, "Hey, like what do you hate doing?" And they're like, "I hate this. I hate this one thing." And I'm like, "Cool. Like, well, let's figure out how to automate it away for you, right?" This is like before
yeah,
AI
but
and stuff.
but if you're like 250 people, you're not gonna. I mean, most likely they're not gonna be doing it.
Most
I'm not
likely
saying that it
no,
couldn't
but
be
like they
possible, but
should. Like I think that's like it's the
yeah,
same.
fair
That
enough.
feels like it's in the same idea as like why isn't marketing and sales talking to each other, right? Like that's a huge problem in these organizations, and like it's the same. Like well, we've done it this way for so long. Like that's how you're supposed to do it. It's like, well, that's a dumb answer. Marketing and sales have to be talking now. Like if they're not symbiotic, like they're not on the same page, like you're not gonna be as effective as if you are on the same page. So it's like if we're just optimized, and it's the same thing here. Like when I just think about like say you're internally and you're going and you're asking people like what you have to do and a cheat for this is just like ask them their opinion. Hey, what's your opinion about this? Because when it's an opinion, it can be whatever. I don't want feedback. I don't want structured. I want your raw opinion about this thing. And you have to like obviously create this safe space for them to do that where there's not repercussions. This is super hard to do, by the way. I'm not saying this is like an easy thing, but when you do that, what you're going to see is like things that you had no idea were a thorn in their side and they were going to quit their job 3 months from now because of that single thing, right? Suddenly you just automated that away from them and you now have a lifespan of like at least 18 more months out of them because of that thing, right? So why, like, I don't know what that role is. They're starting to call them like chief automation officers. Again, this is like a new role that's starting to happen, but like their whole job is like they airdrop into teams. They like look at the processes and they're like, cool, like, okay, what are you doing? I can automate this. Is that valuable to you? What about this? Okay, you like that more? Let's do that. They automate that thing. They set up that system. They like parachute out. They just automated away 60% of whatever that team's like thing is that they hate doing, but it's like high value or a part of the process. And then they go into another team and they do the exact same thing. I think that's going to become a norm. Like you're seeing progressive companies do it already. From a mindset standpoint, I think it's just like everything is changing so rapidly. It's just only increasing. Like, and again, I say this coming from like an early stage space, but like if you're a 200 person company, you should be able to like shift, like, course correct. If you're a 20, 2,000 person company, way different conversation. I think you have to like probably larger problems if you don't have like autonomy built into the organization and you're trying to grow quickly. Like if that's not a part of your fabric, your like business fabric at that point, it is probably a bigger problem that's going on with the company, especially from like a longevity point of view. But again, just to reiterate, I think it's just like half of it is just having that conversation. 9 times out of 10 right now, it's not happening. Like, what do you hate doing?
Yeah.
How often, it's like even a founder, it's like to a founder, it's like, what do you want to happen? What do you hate doing? Like, if you ask those 2 questions, you will have so much insight to like, okay, cool. Like I can probably sell them this thing. Right. And to get there, it's just like, hey, can I get your opinion on this? Cool. Gets on a call. Cool. What are you doing right now? What do you hate about it? And like, what are you trying to accomplish? And like, how do you bridge those things together? And that right there is how you can create companies.
Do you think that the future of like is there going to be a point in which the line between doing it with code versus doing it with no code is going to be so thin that it's indistinguishable, that you're going to be able to do as much with no code tools, stitching things together and leveraging AI and all this stuff that's coming out these days? Or will there always? I mean, I'm for me, I think it's clear that there's always going to be a place for purely like code based engineering and all that, right? For complex solutions and software engineering and whatnot. But for this type of use cases and for the day to day ops, right? And the most human, quote unquote, applications of software and AI, do you think there will be a future in which nobody, like most people, don't need to know code and they'll be good still? Like they will be able to do stuff like Zapier and make, or who knows, maybe we get a super app that puts it all together, because dealing with 25 plus tools is a fucking mess, right? So
Totally.
what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think two thoughts. I think right now, like I haven't seen, like there's no software that could build our web application, right? Like Swell as a code base. Like it's just too complex. There's too much nuance. Like there's just, it could not write, that code base. Number one. Number two, I know personally, like I know some Python, and I'm a script kiddie that turned into a prompt jockey, right? Like that's how I ended up.
Love that.
I'm a little bit technical. But what I found is like these things like, okay, so cool. I find this process that my whole view on everything is like, do it manually, figure out the puzzle, and then automate, as much of it as way. Right. And so what I, traditionally would do is I'd like figure out this puzzle, and then I would go to my engineering team and I'm like, yo, I need a tool set, like an internal tool that can do this thing. Like here's kind of the product spec. And then we build that. But now what I'm seeing is that like, as a marketer with just like a little bit of understanding of programming, like you can make these internal tools and these tool sets that like you don't need to talk to an engineer anymore. So like the engineering team, they're just focusing on product that's facing the customer. I think everything else, like, so engineering is traditionally like the most like resource intensive part of your business, right? It's like there's a million things you want to build, but you have limited engineering bandwidth, right? Like that's the challenge that every company is facing. Unless you're a huge organization and then you have no idea what to build, then you like have decision fatigue, right? That's a whole other thing. But when you're an early stage company, it's typically you have this constraint. So if that is the constraint, like you want your engineering resources to only be focused on product that faces the customer, right? Because that's how you get more revenue. Everything else, like all your internal tools, like all of these things that like support your marketing team, like all of these things that support your customer experience team, like all of that, you want them to be able to like self-sufficiently handle that as much as possible. So I think that like there's kind of two ways that I see this happening. It's like, okay, cool. Like as a marketer, like I'm probably just going to like write these scripts, and like I'm doing this already where like AI is helping me write these, scripts that's automate this thing for me, like whether it's web scraping or content, whatever that ends up being. And then there's also all these companies that are spinning up that like they solve like this very specific use case for a team. And like, I'll just go pay them $20 a month to do that thing. So for example, like you want a chat bot with your internal knowledge base library, right? That can like go into your intercom or whatever, right? Like all these companies you can basically like use them for that. I just think that, I don't think no code will ever replace like good software engineers. And I think that's like what you typically see too, right? It's like a lot of the times like people build a no code app and they get like, it's awesome. It's perfect to get their MVP, get their first customers. And then like, as soon as they do that, they're like, oh, I just hit the limitation wall at 100 customers. And now like, we're going to go build, like basically rebuild this thing. But I'll go raise a round. I'll go do this. Like, I think that will probably become like more of a norm, especially for like marketers or like growth, like founders, right? That are like from the beginning, they don't have a co-founder that's technical, but they'll basically like prove the idea. And then with that, they then go and they figure out, okay, now how do I actually build this full web application out? So yeah, I don't know. Maybe said a different way is like, it's the path of least resistance. That's what everybody's going to do, right? And so like no code is kind of this path of least resistance, but like there's no way you're going to build, an enterprise piece of software that has 100,000 users on it. And, you know, people will argue with me against this. Like, I know like this is people are like, yeah, totally, no code can scale this. I just don't think that it has that capability to be stable, right? To be an enterprise piece of software. That's just my view, though.
Yeah. And maybe it doesn't. I think, I mean, I'm not that technical, so I can like actually speak with a clear information here. But in my opinion, like, I think you're right. Like, it will never. But my point is, like, sure, it might need code, but will you need someone that actually knows code to write the code to build the software? Because it seems to me that with this AI tools, like, if they get the reasoning for us, they can learn the language for us. They know the language already, right? Because you can ask, like, write me this in Python or whatever, right? To do this and this and that. And if I have logical thinking as a human, I will be able to communicate with AI to tell him, like, hey, I need code that does this. And if this scenario happens, then I need you to, you know, add another line that fixes it. And if there's a bug, you need to let me know at every line, whatever, right? And you write it in this language.
I think that will actually replace no code, right? Like, that will be,
exactly.
You can just do you can do pseudocode into it. But I think the thing where it gets, just from my experience, where it gets challenging is like when you have like a directory of multiple files and like a huge code base, and just like what you're writing, what the AI is writing currently, like it having knowledge of the other, like, you know, directories within that piece of software. Like, having the whole context of everything is where it gets tripped up, in my experience. Maybe that changes. Like, again, like, you know, you're talking about Gemini with 1 million token context limit. I mean, hypothetically, like, it could write this. From what I've seen so far, the code that it writes is like terrible. And like, my friends that have used it, they're like, yo, you can't even use 10% of this. The best one that people have, you know, what I'm seeing right now, people like the most is Claude. They're saying the outputs are the like highest quality. I think GPT-5 will probably be like an even further step above that. And it sounds like Mistral is working on some stuff that will be even like crazier. But yeah, I think if you're talking about like simple MVP, like web app, like right now, you and I could go spin up like a I don't know, a business name domain generator and plug into the GoDaddy API to see if the domain is available. And then you like describe your business and it generates random domains for you, right? That are actually like .coms and available. Like, that is totally doable. Like, we could probably build that in like 3 hours, right? Of just like prompting AI and building a single page web app. Now, if I try to build like a login system and have it connected to Stripe and like all of these other components, and then that expands out into this whole other product suite, there's like a threshold just right now. It's more just like technical limitations than anything that you would hit. I think anything is possible in the future. Like, again, if you get a good AI that can write code and it has 1 million token context limit, and it can have context of your entire code base, I mean, who knows what it can do? But just at the moment, I think this is like a bigger thing with the AI thing as well, as people are like, oh, like AGI, like we're going to, you know, if we're going to have the singularity, blah, blah, blah. Like, if you actually look at
singularity,
yeah, it's like, okay, like the amount, we don't even have, like, if you looked at all the compute that was on like the, you know, face of the planet of Earth, and you just aggregated that all in a single place, like, we don't even have enough compute to like mimic a human brain right now, right? Like, so there's no way that we're going to be able to do this, especially like we're just mimicking, like we're just creating neural nets. We're doing what's naturally occurring in like, you know, biology. We're just doing that in a computational form. So like, there's just not enough energy. So first, there's not enough compute, and there's like literally like not enough energy to support that compute at the efficiency level that we're at right now. Like, not enough energy on the planet Earth, from my understanding, right? And this is like people that are way smarter than me, like working on this stuff.
True.
So like, if you take those two constraints and you just like layer that down to where we are, you know, what we're talking about with like programming and software, yeah, the capability of the technology currently is like, yeah, I can build this small web app, which is amazing. Again, it replaces this no code thing. But like, when I get that to a larger level, that's where that challenge happens. Same thing here. Like, we have these LLMs that are super powerful. They're mimicking and they feel human, right? Like, it's pretty amazing sometimes when you like interact with these things, especially like a character AI that's like fine tuned on like somebody, you know, a famous person, etc. But like, if I was actually trying to make that person sentient, like, it's like physically, literally impossible to do that, because there's just not like the resources don't even exist. So just It's something I try to think about a lot with this is like, and like applying this to Swell, like Swell isn't perfect. Like it's like all early stage stuff. Like it's a work in process or progress. But the the thing that like I have to keep reminding myself, because I'm like, I wish it did this. I wish it was better at that. Like all this stuff is going to improve. Like as it gets more sophisticated, we're going to be able to do more and more complex things. And like we're just in the early stages of this. Half of it is right now, like my mantra is just like, don't die. Like just if you can exist long enough in this space and ride this wave, you're going to end up in a really healthy position. So
yeah, hopefully so. Yeah, I'm an optimist for that too. And it's interesting to see the verticals that get affected by the rise of AI, like energy, renewables, stuff like that, and how we're gonna solve the hardware problem and the GPUs problem, and are we gonna let that be centralized and all that stuff, and then we if we get into the rule, like who's gonna regulate AI and how, governments probably, but if so, how is it going to be politically involved? Like bunch of stuff, right, that comes up. 100%. But just to wrap up, though, I wanted to ask you these questions that came to my mind, because we talked a lot about branding, and I would assume, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we both come from a more so direct response based background, so to speak. And I'm a huge fan. Like I've learned marketing through direct response in the first place, and then I learned about branding, and I started to play the long game. And it just so happens that the economy is in a position in which branding is actually the new wave, or like just what's working these days, because nobody, like everyone is
right. Like it's so
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I always thought, like when I did the analysis, I think it, like it will always be better, or you will always need to build a brand if you want to stay in business for long enough. That's kind of the truth for me, at least. Otherwise, you're always going to be competing your profits away, and you're going to be needing to find either a new line, a better line of product. You're going to be battling yourself with your ops to get your CAC down and stay efficient, because you either playing the LTV or the CAC game, in my opinion, right? And for the former one, you need to have branding. So, and here, all this to say, the question is, how do you see direct response fitting into this new era of efficient and sustainable growth? Because it seems to me that everyone is kind of like trying to getting rid of it, or there's this narrative that we're gonna need to get rid of it to match with how buyers buy. And I think there's a middle ground to be found there. I just don't. I mean, I know how it looks for me, but I want to know what it looks like for you.
Yeah. I think what I would say, and like to your audience in particular, is like, if the person already knows I exist and I cold email them, I'm probably going to get it more likelihood of a response to happen. And like that is, so like two things on brand. So it's funny. I started out in affiliate SEO, right? Like the first, like, how I got into all this is like, I was working for this company, and we basically made like, thousands of blog posts that were like related to Amazon products. Right. And it was just, anyway, long story short, overnight, like one day, algorithm change, that company basically goes to zero. And like, I did the same thing. I was like huge in the print on demand space early on, and was like selling on like Redbubble and Etsy and Amazon and all of these places. Never built brand. Same thing. Change happens. Revenue gets nuked. And so then finally I had a wake up call, and I was like, oh, like what is a brand? Like a brand is a thing that can like live on like through all of this like turbulence that happens. So how do you actually measure that? For me personally, I look at it as like people directly searching for my thing and going like directly to me, right? So like you can just like measure this off the search volume for your brand name, right? So like how often is Swell.ai getting searched, or how often is XYZ company getting searched? Is that going up? Is that going down? Is it staying stagnant? That's a measurement. And then when we think about like brand, or how I think about brand, is I'm just trying to own as much mental real estate in that person's mind as they'll allow me to, right? So I'm just trying to like be so omnipresent in their life that they like give more and more space to me within their mind. And that to me is like what a real, like a brand is. And you see this on like P&Ls, right? Like when you look at like Nike, and you look at, Apple, and like these companies that have great brands, they're factoring in like the brand, like trust or whatever they, the metric, or the like what they use to describe it changes, but it's the same idea. It's like, do people like this thing? And like, there's a value in people liking that thing, right? So like, as a founder, like your job is to make a thing that people like. It's like so simple that it's like deceptive, right? Like those are the best things. But yeah, I think with the brand play, like the easiest way to do this is just like provide a ton of value for free in public to people that want to buy your thing. And then naturally over time, like you'll get inbound. But also when in a more concrete example of this, so helped a friend build a podcast in the biotech space. They now have like an email list of like 30,000. It's like every biotech founder in the US basically like gets a notification on a weekly basis about the show. They get like tons of inbound from these people that basically they want to come on the show and talk about their company. They're also like getting inbound from like VCs that are like, let me intro you to my company. And like also like large, like big four banks, right? Like reaching out being like, we want to sponsor this because like we want basically like your audience is super valuable to us. And so for them, what they found is like now that they have this like media engine and like it's just the CEO interviewing like his target customer ICP about their business journey. Like that's literally all the show is. It's like an interview podcast style. And what has happened is now when sales teams reach out to people like cold email or cold call or whatever, cold DM, etc., like what they're seeing is people like, oh, I listened to the show. Very cool. Yeah, let's set up a time, right? So they're way more receptive to that conversation because they already have that awareness. And so that's how I would layer this. Like, I think gone are the days, I say this, but like, I'm out here like YOLOing 1,000 emails like a day, right? Like in cold email, just like, because it's so cheap to do. And we see results. We see like a 1% sign up rate from it. So it's like, I mean, this is for the cost. I do this all day long. But I think the big thing, the big difference is like if I can that same list, if I can have them listening to me talk like on a weekly basis or even on a daily basis, like through social, like when my sales rep reaches out to them cold, it's not going to be cold. They're going to have way more receptiveness to getting that cold outreach from my team.
Yep, warm outbound for the win, and the only way you do
All
warm
day.
outbound is through warming up people at some, like in some way that doesn't require you to directly outreach to them. Because even like you and a lot of people might think that is like you need to, in order for you to do that, you need to see it from a perspective in which the buyer is in full control and power. But if there's a reframe to that, actually, like you're not to give them or you're not supposed to outreach directly to someone who hasn't been first educated on your solution, because they're not deserving of your dedicated time 101. Might as well just, hey, I have my content here, go watch it, go get it, like see if you like it, see if it's relevant to you, and then if I make sense of outreaching to you because I've seen that you're consuming my content, then it will make sense to start a conversation. But otherwise, I might as well have you consume my content because it takes nothing to me, right? Like I'm gonna put it out either way. And so there's two ways to look at it. But I'm glad that you said that, because I think here ourselves as well at FounderVideo, we started doing with video, and it was all about brand awareness and showing the videos and whatnot and creating demand. But we now offer as well, and we build our whole business off of cold email, right? So we saw that especially for early stage startups, sometimes they don't have 10K a month to drop in LinkedIn ads, right? Or 15 or 20 as some accounts do. And so we figured like, okay, we can drop some like 500, 1,000, 1,500 on LinkedIn ads to get the awareness, right? And to make these people know you in a way that feels natural, right? And then we launch campaigns, and then we get your sales reps to outreach to the ones first that engage the most, because you can take a look at that in the LinkedIn Ads analytics, right? You can de-anonymize at the account level, and then you do the warm outbound, right? So I think there's a place for both.
To make that tactical, like imagine you show ads of a founder like talking, show ads of him talking or her talking for like 2 months to an audience. and then you LinkedIn InMail them after those 2 months, right? And you've been running those ads. Like, what do you think the response rate is going to be? They already know you exist, John. Like, of course they're going to be like, open this and respond because you just like, you showed up in their feed so often. So that's such a great tactic, man. I'm going to include that in my newsletter this week.
You feel free to do so. I mean, we're here to share. Okay, cool. So if you want to drop your socials, where should people find you? Where should they follow you? And yeah.
Yeah, Swell.ai.com. That's, where we're going. It's free to sign up. You can start playing around with it. And then I'm most active on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you just Google Cody Schneider, it should come up. If it doesn't, I'm really bad at my job. So that is kind of the best places to connect with me. But however I can be helpful, reach out. I'm obsessed with this and really just like AI powered content marketing. I'll talk to basically anybody about it because it's what I'm currently hyper fixated on. So yeah, thanks again.
Awesome.
For having me, Will. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you having you as well. And it's been a pleasure. Hopefully we'll have you back sooner rather than later. So
I'll come back whenever. Let me know.
Have a good one. Yeah,
awesome.
We'll stay in touch.
Thank you for listening to the Founder Video Podcast with Will Martin, and we'll see you on the next episode.